So we're first going to start with A Christmas Carol. The original Christmas Carol was called A Christmas Carol in Prose, being a ghost story of Christmas. We all know it as A Christmas Carol, published in 1843. Again, very popular story. It's written during a time of a decline in Christmas traditions, and this was an important thing to Dickens, is that as more and more people moved to London, and they started then having to, because they're paying much higher rents, they're having to work longer and harder, that the luxury of just time to sit around and reflect and think is not there anymore. So also being away from families. If you move out, a younger person moves out on your own, you're away from your family. And so they see a sharp decline in any kind of Christmas traditions, such as Christmas trees, decorations, Christmas Day crackers, some things that the English do that Americans don't. And so he wanted to write about this, and he used the Christmas Carol to address these issues. It is a Victorian morality tale. So again, we have to understand that even some of the things today we would say, like, well, there wasn't a problem with this or that, but under Victoria's idea of what is moral and not, it wasn't fitting some of the things that he were doing. Now, if we think, that's the capitalist dream, is to accumulate wealth, what's wrong with that? But at this time frame, it wasn't supposed to be that way. You were definitely supposed to, as far as Christian tradition, give back to the community, spend a portion of your time and money back in the community, etc. So he was not doing this. Scrooge was a financier, money changer, and that's all he cared about was money. He didn't care about friends. He didn't care about loving anyone. He didn't care about Christmas. So this is an important aspect. We see kind of the dying of the emotional side of a person and giving into just the greed that's there. And so we see even these same things bubbling up in A Christmas Tale. We see these bubbling up again in A Christmas Carol that takes place in Doctor Who in the 51st century, but it's still all harkening back to these Victorian ideals, and we'll look at that in a little bit more detail. Some of the major themes. Story deals with Dickens' recurrent themes of social injustice, poverty. He wrote this in the wake of something called the Poor Laws. And so this means that they were trying to get more and more money out of the people who owed them money. So if anyone came to you for a loan, you gave it to them, then they couldn't pay back the debt, you had certain means to go after them to get the debts, besides prison. But because people were needing to pay out more and more, they would work more and more longer hours in harsher conditions, even hazardous conditions, knowing they could possibly die, but they needed the money. Throughout his life, because the Christmas Carol was very popular, he started touring around, and he would give readings, as we saw in Tooth and Claw, The Unquiet Dead. And he talked about what his purpose was in writing this. And you can read through some of the things that I put here. This time frame, we have people who are not washing a lot. They don't wash their clothes. A stench is among them, because again, they can't afford running water, and to go out and imagine this: if you lived in that one little room I showed you among your family, then again, there's no place to bathe. So where are you going to go to wash? You can't go down to the river and wash in it. It's now polluted because that's where all the sewerage ends up. So washing was not very high on the list, nor was washing clothes. At night, the streets were lit with gas lamps. Side streets or alleys, not at all. So those became the areas where the gangs could attack people who unknowingly walked into a place they shouldn't be. And this is a factory scene from this time frame. And you'll notice that we have mostly girls and women working in a factory, one boy here. And as long as you could run one of these machines, you would do it. You would do it daily from sunup to sundown. Most people worked at least 12-hour shifts, if not 14 or 15-hour shifts. It was extremely common. And it was a 7-day-a-week job. Weekends did not exist. So because of this kind of conditions in the U.S., we were one of the first countries who finally said no to child workers. And this was actually how our unions were born in this country, is because the group of people got together and said, you know, if you're under a certain age, you shouldn't be in here. You shouldn't be standing on your feet 12, 14 hours a day with minimal breaks. You shouldn't have to work 7 days a week. You should be paid a decent salary. And so the unions banded together, and then they created these new working conditions. And so we don't see children, for the most part, in our country working in factories, etc. And we do know that that still happens overseas. We talk about it all the time. In other places, we, whittled it down to an 8-hour day. You only work Monday through Friday. You get a weekend. You do have to be paid a decent salary for the work that you do, and that you get breaks and stuff. So at this time frame, again, you can imagine that Charles Dickens did this for the vast majority of his life. The first 14, 15 years, he was working at one of these machines from sunup till sundown, and he earned $2 a week for it. People were drinking, so just kind of going along with what are some of the issues that Charles Dickens was up in arms about. People were drinking water out of the Thames, the same river where all the sewage went. But it's also a river with an extremely high tide, meaning during the tidal range, it goes up and down something like 25 feet of difference. So you don't want to be caught there bathing or washing your clothes when the tide comes in. So it's not a good place to go and drink. Cholera was a problem up until 1875 when sewers were finally built. So again, 75 years in, of more and more people, they finally decide to building sewers. Wet weather straw was scattered to soak up the mud and wet. And before 1834, the church was the responsible party for poor. After this, the church couldn't keep up with the amount of people in the city as it was growing more and more, so workhouses were built. So most families worked and lived here. So they would move to a place and they would physically work there at the same time. And again, it's what I've already told you, badly paid, long hours, a very high chance of catching a communicable disease, because if you have 100 people working in very close proximity, one person coughs, other people get it, cholera is going around. And a lot of the machines just weren't safe, so it was very likely that you would lose a hand, fingers, arm, or something, if not your life. So, the next one, we're continuing on with our tale of Humanities in the episodes you watch for today.